Hey, how's it going? And welcome back to Consuming Cinema, a show about making and pairing food and drinks from popular movies and TV shows. Today, we're making and pairing a Bloody Mary with a steak sandwich from Fletch. If you haven't seen Fletch, it's a 1985 neo-noir comedy directed by Michael Ritchie and based on the 1974 Gregory MacDonald novel of the same name, which follows Irwin Fletch Fletcher, an undercover journalist, die-hard Laker fan, and a true master of disguise, who's approached by wealthy businessman Alan Stanwyck, who tells Fletch that he's dying of cancer and offers Fletch $50,000 to murder him so that his wife can collect the insurance money. Unconvinced by the proposal, Fletch does some deeper investigating, leading him to Stanwyck's ritzy tennis club, where a waiter asks what he'd like to eat.
Yes, very good. I'll have a Bloody Mary and a steak sandwich and a steak sandwich, please. Very good.
But before we get to our steak sandwich, we're first going to make our mix for our Bloody Mary, which starts in a blender, to which we'll add one 14.2 ounce can of San Marzano tomatoes, which is not at all traditional, but makes for a fantastic Bloody Mary mix, followed by a quarter cup of lemon juice. You can use both lemon and lime if you'd like, as well as half a teaspoon of celery salt, followed by a half a teaspoon of Old Bay, about a teaspoon of freshly cracked pepper, in addition to half a tablespoon of horseradish, or more if you're like me. I like to use this fresh ground kind as opposed to prepared horseradish, as well as half a tablespoon of Worcestershire sauce. And last but not least, a half a tablespoon of Tabasco, or your choice of hot sauce. Then we're just gonna blend this all up, after which we'll transfer it to the fridge while we work on our steak sandwich. The first component of which is going to be a chimichurri, which is a simple combination of around a quarter cup of Italian parsley, along with an equal amount of cilantro, in addition to 2 finely chopped Serrano peppers, 2 cloves of garlic, chopped as well as the juice of half a lemon, as well as some crushed red pepper, followed by some red wine vinegar, as well as some dry oregano, and some freshly cracked pepper. And now we're gonna fill this up with some olive oil, but you don't want the chimichurri to be drowning in it, but you want just enough olive oil to make a saucy consistency. And then we're gonna mix this all together and give it a quick taste, after which I added just a bit more olive oil, as well as some more red wine vinegar, in addition to some more black and red pepper, and finally some salt to taste. Then we'll mix this up once again until it's perfect, before transferring our chimichurri to the fridge while we make the next component to our sandwich, which is a bacon jam. And our bacon jam starts with bacon, of course. This is a pound of bacon that I've chopped up, but you don't have to be super precise because we're gonna chop it up again later. So we'll add the bacon to a medium pot, and then we're gonna give it a stir and bring that pot up to medium-high heat, and we're going to allow this bacon to render out completely. And while it does, we'll stir it occasionally, and you really gotta be patient with this process because you might think the bacon is rendered out completely, but it likely hasn't. So just keep stirring occasionally, and then when you finally see the bacon start foaming up like this, you know you'll be getting closer. But we're still looking for totally crispy, fully rendered bacon bits. And once you achieve this, we'll then take the bacon off the heat and strain it all out, making sure to reserve some of that bacon fat. But first, we'll put a little of that bacon fat back in our pot before then adding 1 whole chopped yellow onion, which we want to sweat down for a little while. And while those onions cook down, I'm gonna bake 2 pieces of bacon I reserved in a 350-degree oven, which will become one of the 2 garnishes for our Bloody Mary. Then, once our onions get nice and soft, we're gonna grab our reserved bacon, and we want to proceed to chop up that bacon into even finer bits like so, after which we'll add our chopped bacon back into the pot with our onions, and we're gonna mix that all together, along with a bit more bacon fat, and then we'll deglaze the pot with a half a cup of bourbon, and then we want to cook this down for a while until the bacon and the onions basically become one seamless color. And while it cooks down, we're gonna add some dry thyme, as well as some cayenne pepper, in addition to some freshly cracked black pepper, followed by a good bit of brown sugar, as well as some red wine vinegar. Then we're gonna mix that all together, adding in any additional seasoning if need be along the way. And then once our bacon jam is starting to look particularly jammy and one seamless color, we are then going to finish it off with a drizzle of balsamic vinegar, along with just the tiniest bit of olive oil, which will help give our bacon jam a nice sheen.
The sheen.
And at this point, our bacon jam is all finished and looks absolutely spectacular. But before you're tempted to eat it all on its own, we're gonna transfer that bacon jam to a bowl while we work on the next component of our sandwich. Because what's a great sandwich without some great bread? This is a whole wheat sesame baguette that I bought from my local bakery. And we're just gonna toast this at 350 degrees to get it nice and crispy, while we work on the star of the show, the steak. Now this is actually the second of 2 steaks I've filmed to show both the traditional way as well as my preferred method. I also use 2 different grades of the same cut of beef, ribeye. This specific ribeye is a boneless USDA choice, which is cheaper and has less marbling than the first steak I used, which is a USDA prime boneless ribeye, which you can see is much thicker and has significantly more fat content. It also costs about twice as much. This is because it's produced from younger, more well-fed cattle. And for this first steak, I covered it in a bit of oil before generously seasoning both sides with salt and pepper, and then we're gonna add some oil to our cast iron pan, or in my case, some of that reserved bacon fat. And then we wanna get this pan screaming hot, which you can test by flicking a few drops of water onto it. And then when it's sizzling, we will throw our steak onto our cast iron, allowing it to get a nice hard sear on the first side. And then after a few minutes, we'll flip our ribeye over to sear the other side, and additionally sear each side of the steak as well, before then finishing it in a 500-degree oven for between 3 and 5 minutes, depending on how rare you want it. I could have left mine in for longer, but we'll get to that later. After which we'll allow our steak to rest at room temperature for at least 15 minutes. Now with this second ribeye, I wanted to show you my preferred method of cooking a steak, which is called the reverse sear, which is basically an inversion of what we just did. We're gonna cook the steak at a low temperature in the oven before finishing it with a hard sear on the cast iron. Now to prep this, we'll do it the exact same way, coating the steak in oil and covering it on all sides in salt and pepper. And if you're wondering why I didn't do this method the first time, it would have been a lot more difficult because I was simultaneously baking bacon and toasting bread at higher temperature. Because once our steak is nicely seasoned, we are then going to put it on a wire rack lined baking sheet and then bake it in a 250-degree oven for 45 minutes to around an hour, depending on how large of a ribeye you're cooking. If you want it medium rare, we're looking for around 120 to 125 degrees Fahrenheit internal temperature by the time it comes out of the oven. And once we achieve that internal temp, we are then going to add some oil to our cast iron skillet and get it piping hot once again using that water test, at which point we are going to add our par-cooked ribeye as well as a few cloves of garlic, allowing that first side to get a nice hard sear. And once it has, we'll flip our steak over and add a couple tablespoons of butter to the pan as well as a bushel of fresh thyme. And then we'll butter baste this steak on its first side while our other side sears, after which we'll flip the steak over one more time and butter baste the other side before transferring the steak to a cutting board and likewise allowing it to rest for at least 15 minutes. But whatever way you prepare your steak, once it's time to plate, we will grab our toasted bread, and onto the bottom half of the loaf we will lay down a nice even layer of our bacon jam, and after our bacon jam is perfectly even, we will then smear the other side with this quick Dijon sauce I made, which is a simple combination of a few tablespoons of creme fraiche, or as Randy Marsh calls it,
cream fraiche. Oh yeah. Ugh.
Followed by about a half as much Dijon mustard, in addition to some lemon zest, as well as some white pepper and a bit of salt. Then we'll mix this all together, after which I added a touch more Dijon, as well as a bit of lemon juice. Now we want to spread a nice even layer of this Dijon fraiche sauce, after which we'll grab our steak, but before we cut into it, we're first going to add a layer of arugula that has been lightly dressed with a bit of lemon, salt, and pepper, and we want to gently layer this arugula atop our bacon jam, after which it's finally time to cut into our steak, which we want to do against the grain, revealing what was at first exactly what I wanted, medium rare slices. But as we got towards the thicker bits, the meat did become a bit more rare than medium rare, which is not an issue. We'll just stick the larger portion back on the skillet for about a minute or two. That being said, this is precisely why I love the reverse sear method, because as we can see when I cut into the reverse seared steak after it's rested, we have an absolutely perfect medium rare pink throughout. Nevertheless, after a couple more minutes on the hot cast iron, the large piece of ribeye was exactly where I wanted it, and while some pieces were still a bit more rare than medium rare, I proceeded to lay the best slices onto our sandwich and even threw in a couple of those rare pieces on there, because quite honestly, I like rare steak. But before we finish topping this sandwich, we're first gonna make our Bloody Mary, which starts in a pint glass that we'll fill 3/4 of the way full of ice, followed by 2 ounces of vodka. I'm using Pau Maui vodka, which I talked about a lot in our last episode, you can watch here. together. Next, we're gonna pour in around 3 to 4 ounces of our Bloody Mary mix. It's really up to you how tomatoey or thick or thin you'd like it, after which we'll swizzle that mix around with a bar spoon to thoroughly mix it with the vodka, making sure to leave plenty of room for our garnishes, which include 1 stalk of celery, as well as 1 of those pieces of bacon, and if that piece of bacon happens to break, well, then we'll grab its understudy, this piece of bacon, followed by this somewhat random garnish I made, which consists of some shrimps, which I dusted in some Old Bay before sauteing it in the leftover juices of the steak, and then assembling onto a skewer with some cornichons, as well as some pearl cocktail onions, and finally we'll finish with a straw, as well as a lemon wedge. And once our Bloody Mary is all done, we'll finish off our sandwich by topping it with some of that beautiful chimichurri, and last but not least, some thin slices of shaved Parmesan, and gently drape over our chimichurri drizzled steak. And at long last, your Bloody Mary with steak sandwich is finally done. Now there's nothing left to do but to taste it. So we'll start by cutting this steak sandwich in half and admiring the cross section a bit before giving it a bite, and wow. Wow. That is really one phenomenal steak sandwich. Now, I know I'm kind of biased because I specifically designed it this way, but each layer brings something unique to the table. It's incredibly well balanced. The crunch of the bread, the tender, melt-in-your-mouth beef, that acidic, somewhat spicy chimichurri, the tangy, creamy sauce, the bit of salinity and funk from the Parmesan, all accompanied by that out-of-this-world bacon jam. This sandwich is truly exquisite. But how does our steak sandwich pair with a Bloody Mary? Well, first off, I'll say I'm really not much of a Bloody Mary fan, but making your own mix from scratch is definitely the way to go, because this is one of the best Bloody Marys I've ever had. And perhaps somewhat surprisingly, it's actually a wonderful accompaniment to this steak sandwich, because I believe what this Bloody Mary does here is that it emulates other popular sandwich ingredients that I chose not to put on this particular sandwich, be it the presence of tomato or a pickled element that we get in multiple places here. And there's also even this kind of cool surf and turf thing happening with the bite of shrimp and a bite of the steak. So while I thought these two would be far better off on their own than they are together, I'm thrilled to report that this pairing is most definitely worthy of 2 big thumbs up. If you like the channel, please like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell. Please leave any video suggestions in the comments below. Full recipes will be included in a link in the video description. Follow us on all forms of social media at Consuming Cinema. And don't forget to join us next week when we make a pairing from I Love You Man. And as always, thank you for watching.